drawing boards, planning, anything in this region?
The only course we have in the States is with Davis Love down in Georgia, and that's, I talked to the owner yesterday, and he said he has a closing meeting scheduled for the beginning of next week, which it strikes me as funny right before Christmas, but he's expecting funding to come through then. So we may break ground, we may start there. We started clearing, but we may actually start construction in January or February. But he's been saying, he's been sort of on and off the fence for 2 years as to when we get started. So the prospects aren't good. I mean, I heard some stat, I don't know where it came from, but thinking that next year there'll be 34 course openings in the United States. So you're talking about going from 400 whatever back in 2000 down to 34. So it's, well, yeah, they've all got a great shot at it. Ron's going to have to cut it down to 5.
Gil, with Castle Stewart,
Yeah.
questions. First of all, I mean, you've always been working within the constraints of the land, and here was a place that you wanted to.
Right.
And was that easier or harder? That's number one. And number two, and I was lucky I get to play it, so I know what it looks like. Virtually every hole has a place that has a spectacular view. So you're not only dealing with strategy, you're also dealing with the view.
Right.
How do you bring that together?
Well, I was very lucky to work with Mark Parson in on that. Both Jim and I were. I mean, Mark is extremely talented. Visionary is a word that you don't throw out an awful lot, but he's a guy who really, really gets it and obsesses on it, thinks about it all the time about golf course architecture, and so. Obviously his experience at Kings Barnes was much more of an earth-moving experience than we would typically build. So we relied a lot on his experience, especially in Scotland, as far as earth-moving goes. And I'll be perfectly honest, the first couple holes were difficult, from the standpoint of trying to figure out, all these different inputs into the design, but also how do we build this stuff. And I felt where it really kind of broke free for me was Mark and I were having a conversation, and I did the shaping on the greens and the fairways, and I got off the bulldozer and I said, well, where do we think the fairway line is going to be here? Because I was thinking, how am I going to shape this? And he says, wherever you want it to be. And it just kind of clicked, like, you know what, I don't have to shape to the fairway line, or I don't have to find the contour in the ground that makes sense to support a hazard. And to be honest, it was kind of liberating.
Wait a minute, Gil. Am I understanding this correctly? I mean, I know Mark, and he is the most interesting guy.
Yeah, he's
not
tremendous.
an architect. I've never talked to him in my life, but
Thanks,
at
Tom.
what,
Thanks, Tom.
at what point did he, he's not an architect. At what point did you say, God, I really see something in what this guy's talking about?
Oh, I think it was early on.
Early on?
It was early on, but when we were actually on site, collaboration is a difficult term, and I believe wholeheartedly in collaboration. I mean, Jim Wagner is my partner. I mean, we collaborate on everything. He's as involved as I am in all of our projects. Working with Brad was great. Working with Davis is great. I don't mind. I mean, I think it can be a lot of fun, actually. If we're with somebody who's like-minded and likes to have a good time and enjoys what they're doing, I think collaborations are great.
But didn't you think he was a little too theoretical or philosophical in the beginning?
Not necessarily. I think there were some things that we didn't see eye to eye on, but I think that's why I think this was a very good collaboration, because there was, minimalist is the wrong word, but,
No, but
a guy who likes to work more with the existing landscapes.
maybe 10 years ago, we went up to that apartment of his in New York, Wayne, and he hadn't done Kings Barnes yet, I don't think. That was 10
No,
years.
he had.
Had he?
Yeah.
But he started talking to us there for the whole morning about how do you balance the psychology of risk-reward between all levels of players. And we went, whoa, that's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah. No, he gets deep into it. And I needed to get on the bulldozer and get away sometimes, don't get me wrong. But he was fascinating to work with. And I think I'm certain we'll work again. I mean, God willing, we'll do this someplace else. But he was really, part of, I think, the weakness that Jim and I have is that we are able to build things. We're able to get on the machines and do things. So as a result, you tend to, I'll think about it when I'm building it. And there's some great artistry, and you can and have some good results from that. Mark was so prepared when we hit the ground running on day one. It was a breath of fresh air not to have to do all of that thing. It was very much like what happened at Rustic Canyon. Jeff Shackelford was out there day in, day out before we ever moved on site. I mean, he knew that like the back of his hand.
I didn't think you'd ever admit that.
Why? No, I think Jeff is, he's a huge part of that
I
project.
know.
But he was
He
always,
doesn't admit it.
what's that?
He won't.
No, he's, well,
Maybe he
he's,
just doesn't like
it's,
me.
it's that California thing. So, I mean, it was great to have somebody who was able to put in the time ahead of the project, you know, to spend, Jeff spent 90 days on site before we even broke ground. So that was, and Mark was the same way. Mark lived over there. He was able to, so there was a lot of that. And then we would play off whatever I would build. He'd be like, well, what about this? What about that? And we'd refine, or he'd come out and go, oh my God, I never thought of that. And so it really was a terrific,
That's a great collaboration.
yeah, it really was. I mean, I couldn't think of anything, it went well. Like I said, the first couple holes, you know, it was, I read somewhere, I can't remember what, it was an index or something, where he said we fought like cats and dogs, but we really didn't. I said, when did we do that? And he said, I don't know, I think the writer made that up. But,
The water holes or?
no, 15, 16, 17 holes up top. We had to wait. We had to wait for the badgers to finish mating before we could work down on the shoreline. I'm serious. There were protective fences around the badger dens that we had to stay away from, and they were all down by the coast, so we couldn't start up there. Which, to be honest, was one of the most fortuitous things about the project, is the environmentalists were also focused on the badgers, because for years in the highlands they've been killed off because they killed the sheep, and so they're an endangered species, protected now. And you know, nobody noticed that we were building 3 feet from the water's edge, you know, right on the beach. They were worried about the badgers, so it was great.
Thanks, Gil. Is there
Yeah.
anything else you'd like to add?
No, that's fine by me.
Thank you very much.